Hello everyone, welcome to the Yissel Missile Productions channel. My name is Steven Yissel, and today we are continuing our deep dive series with part 13 into Ed Leedskalnin and his Coral Castle. Last time we were on, we had started The Energy Grid by Bruce L. Cathie, and we got through chapter 1 as well as the intro and all of the other bibliography that and reference books that he used. So if you're interested in seeing the other book titles, that's one of the parts to take a look at. But today we are starting chapter 2, which is titled Mathematics of the World Grid. And as always, we will be having the picture slideshow here. I'll make this a little bigger. There we go. Okay, so hopefully this green background is going to be alright. So just let me know if it's not. But I figured we'd change it up a little bit. We'll keep this one for this deep dive series. And yeah, that'll be that. So Bruce Cathie is a very prolific author in this field. He has a lot of works that I'm considering jumping into even further. But for the time being, we're going to try knocking this book out week by week. And hopefully we will get through this fairly quickly. There's some chapters in here that are like 6 pages, so we're going to start combining chapters at some point, but for these 10-page, 20-page chapters, we're just going to keep it to one chapter for the time being. So, again, thanks for being here. If you haven't done so already, please like and subscribe. I'm building this channel out with deep dives. We have a few others that are in the works, and it's weekly content. I'll be here every week with this show through the end of June. And then I'll take a 2-week break, and then I'll be back after that. Probably mid-July or towards the end of July is when I'll pick things back up. But we got 2 full months here. So get ready. Guess we'll begin now. And yeah, I'll keep an eye on the chat here. Super chats are welcome. I do appreciate those. I did get pushed over the threshold for Google AdSense, so I am getting a payout of $115 this month, so I really appreciate that. The last time that Google AdSense paid out was in October, just to give you an idea of how long it takes to accumulate $100 on a monetized channel. And I wasn't monetized for a good period of time the past several years. So I'm glad to have it back. And it gives me a little more incentive to keep producing these videos for you guys. And yeah, it's good overall. But if you guys feel like giving me super chats, please, by all means. It will definitely help me. And I'll put it towards getting other books for these series so that we can get more information out here. So without further ado, we will begin Chapter 2, Mathematics of the World Grid. My interest in the increasing UFO activity in the New Zealand area led me to the discovery that the surface of the world was crisscrossed with an intricate network of energy grid lines. I began my research in 1965. In a general way, I was convinced that UFOs were actively engaged in a survey of the Earth for some definite reason. I felt that their visits were not haphazard, that they were just on casual sightseeing tours. Quite a number of investigators around the world had come to the conclusion that the sightings were beginning to form a pattern. At this period, however, this pattern was so complex as to defy any definition or solution. By the correlation of sightings, small sections of track had been identified, and some saucers had been seen moving along these set paths. Some of these had hovered over certain spots at set intervals, but these bits and pieces of track lines were so scattered around the surface of our planet that it was quite impossible to fit them together into any semblance of order. I was certain that if an overall pattern could be found and plotted, it might be possible to establish the reason behind UFO activity. I considered that the pattern would be geometric if these things were intelligently controlled, and that if somehow I could find the key to one section, then I might solve the rest by duplication and inference. I had cited the number of identified objects in the sky over a period of several years, and by correlating 2 of these with other data, I was eventually able to construct a grid system which covered the whole world. One of these sightings was in 1956. I was a DC-3 co-pilot crewing a flight from Auckland to Paraparaumu. So this is spelled P-A-R-A-P-A-R-A-U-M-U. It was about 6 p.m., conditions were calm, and there was unlimited visibility. We were just south of Waverly at 7,000 feet when I saw this object at an extremely high altitude in the east. I drew the captain's attention to it, and together we watched it travel in a curved trajectory from east to west across our track until it disappeared in a flash of light at about 10,000 feet in an area of D'Urville Island. It appeared to travel across New Zealand in the vicinity, or slightly to the north, of Cook Strait, and it was so large that two streaks, similar to vapor trails, were seen to extend from either side of its pale green disk. When about halfway across the strait, a small object detached itself from the parent body and dropped vertically until it disappeared. It looked almost as if the main disk was at such a high temperature that a globule had dripped from it. I thought about this later and decided that if that were so, the small object would also have a curved trajectory in the direction of the parent body. But this was not so. It detached and dropped vertically down at great speed. There could be only one answer for this action. The small body must have been controlled. Calculations at a later date proved this UFO to have been between 1,500 to 2,000 feet in diameter. A report in a Nelson newspaper on the following day described an explosion at a high altitude to the north of the city. The shockwave broke windows in some local glass houses. The other sighting occurred on March 12, 1965. This was the best and most interesting of them all, and from then my investigations were pressed on with all speed until they culminated in my present findings. I had always expected to see UFOs in the sky, and that was where my attention was usually focused. When I was flying, I was alert and ready to analyze any object sighted from the aircraft. I never expected to find a saucer landing at my feet, and so far this has never happened. The sighting, however, was different from all the others, because I observed it lying under 30 feet of water. I was scheduled to carry out a positioning flight from Winuwapai, Auckland's main airport at that time, to Kaitaia. Departure was at 11 a.m., and as no passengers were involved and the weather was perfect, I decided to fly visually to Kaitaia along the west coast. An officer from the operations department was on board, and this was a good opportunity to show him some of the rugged country to the north. I must stress that air traffic regulations were strictly observed during the flight. When leaving Winuwapai, I climbed to clear the area, and when approaching the southern end of Kaipara Harbor, just north of Helensville, I dropped to a lower altitude to have a better look at anything in the flight path. The tide in the harbor was well out, and the water over the mudflats and estuaries was quite shallow. I suppose we were about a third of the way across the harbor when I spotted what I took to be a stranded gray-white whale. I veered slightly to the port to fly more directly over the object and to obtain a better look. I suppose a pilot develops the habit of keeping his emotions to himself. As far as I can remember, I gave no indication of surprise, and I said nothing as I looked down. My, quote, whale, end quote, was definitely a metal fish. I could see it very clearly, and I quote from the notes I made later. A. The object was perfectly streamlined and symmetrical in shape. B. It had no external control surfaces or protrusions. C. It appeared metallic, and there was a suggestion of a hatch on top, streamlined in shape. It was not quite halfway along the body, as measured from the nose. D. It was resting on the bottom of the estuary and headed toward the south, as suggested from the streamlined shape. E. The shape was not that of a normal submarine, and there was no superstructure. F. I estimated the length as 100 feet with a diameter of 15 feet at the widest part. G. The object rested in no more than 30 feet of clear water. The bottom of the harbor was visible and the craft was sharply defined. Inquiries made from the Navy confirmed that it would not have been possible for a normal submarine to be in this particular position due to the configuration of the harbor and coastline. The chief engineer of the Ministry of Works, Auckland, checked this spot on the harbor with a depth sounder in September 1969. He informed me afterwards that a hole had been detected in the harbor bed approximately 1/8 of a mile wide and over 100 feet deep, which I consider would indicate that some activity had been carried out in this position some 5 years previously. See photocopy of the report, page 246. Let's check that out. It's photocopy 4. It's titled Kaipara Harbor, New Zealand. Gives the coordinates. The weather was clear. September 5th, 1969. Time 1200 hours to 1227 hours. NZST eastbound. When passing over this area, speed 7, I want to say 7 knots. The depth sounder, while indicating on an average depth of 40 to 50 feet, the meter needle commenced to swing back and forth from 0 to 120 extent of range scale. So it went from minimal to extreme back and forth violently. This continued until the black beacon was abeam. The meter now acted normally. I swung around and returned to this area immediately, and the meter carried on the same way. Then carried on up the main channel to Shelley Beach. Distance of 6.5 miles. The depth sounder acted normally. The balance... let me reread that. The depth sounder acted normally. The balance of the trip. I guess I was right reading that. All right. Checked sounder accuracy near enough to maker's claim. Marlin MI 20 model, 8 months old. 200 kilohertz batteries okay. All connections okay. My son, Carl, age 7.5, said that the meter, quote, was swinging around like mad, end quote. The sounder has never done this before. The magnetic compass was stable. Written at 1400 hours at Shelley Beach. Signed J. Jackson, May 9th, 1969. Report from the Chief Engineer of the Ministry of Works, Auckland, regarding the position of the Kaipara Harbor where the submarine-type object was observed. And you know what? I guess I'll just show you what that looks like real quick. I just read from this printed report here. And you can see it's all the way right before chapter 29. So we'll probably take a glance at that again another time here. Continuing on. I had a further key to the puzzle in April 1965. My wife saw an advertisement in the local paper seeking members for a UFO organization called New Zealand Scientific and Space Research. I contacted this organization and found that a vast amount of information had been efficiently compiled. Material had been collected from 25 different countries over a period of 12 years. You hear that? So there's a lot of research that goes into this. Hey, Jason, I see you there. Good to have you here. Material had been collected from 25 different countries over a period of 12 years. So this is pretty comprehensive. I was invited to study the information at leisure. Amongst this massive data, I discovered the reports of a UFO that had been seen from several different localities in both islands of New Zealand on March 26th, 1965. People in Napier, New Plymouth, Palmerston North, Wanganui, Fielding and Otaki Forks in the North Island, Nelson Coast Road, Blenheim, and Westport, Cape Foulwind, in the South Island, had all reported sightings. It was decided that I try to plot the track of this UFO. From the considerable amount of information available, I found that the maximum variation in the times of sightings from all areas was 15 minutes. Most reports gave the time as 9:45 p.m. This proved that the object must have been very large and at high altitude during the greater part of its trajectory. Here is a brief description of each sighting taken from the original reports. Number 1, New Plymouth. About 9:40 p.m., Mr. A. Nixon went outside his home to put out milk bottles. He had a clear view over the sea to the north. A glow first appeared on the horizon, and as he looked at it, he saw a light that was approaching slowly. Then it came nearer at tremendous speed, lighting up the clouds in a red glow as if it passed through them. As it passed overhead in a clear patch of the sky, the object was sharply defined. It was bright white in color and was ball-shaped with a silvery edge. After passing overhead, the rear emitted a red glow. It sped to the west of Mount Egmont and disappeared. According to Mr. Nixon, quote, his hair stood on end, end quote. Number 2, Napier. A bright object was seen by a resident to curve through the sky at 9:45 p.m. It was visible in the northwest and changed color from white to a vivid green, then to a vivid red, before it disappeared behind some trees. Number 3, Wanganui. Between 9:30 p.m. and 10 p.m., Mr. M.F.C. Grodenhuis was looking out of a window when he saw a flash similar to lightning. He then observed a fireball which appeared to fall toward the south. It began as a bright white light, changed to greenish blue, then to a sizzling red before it disappeared like a shooting star. The sky was clear at the time. Number 4, Fielding. While cycling up a hill, Miss Ralda Campbell heard a swishing sound. It was followed by a blinding blue-white light, similar to a flash of sheet lightning. The whole area was lit by this. Then she saw a huge orange ball that, quote, looked like a dinner plate, end quote. The ball seemed to emanate from the left edge of the blue-white light. After a few seconds, it exploded, and 3 orange balls, like tennis balls and very dense, appeared at the right-hand edge and disappeared. Miss Campbell said the 3 smaller balls seemed to emerge from the larger ball when it vanished. The apparent track was from northeast to southwest. Number 5, Palmerston North. A woman witness saw an object in the sky at about 9:30 p.m. It was a vivid green with a long comet-like tail issuing from a deep orange center. It descended and disappeared from view behind a nearby building. Number 6, Otaki Forks. This is a position in the Tararua mountain range. While tramping in the area, 5 Venturer scouts saw an enormous bluish-white ball of light in the sky at 9:45 p.m. This was surrounded by what looked like sheet lightning. The sighting was brief. The ball seemed to be stationary and apparently far away to the west, and about half the size of a full moon. One of the scouts, Mr. Parnell, said that later the size of the object worked out trigonometrically by the group, and the diameter arrived at was about 2,000 feet. By the way, if I'm having trouble reading words, it's because I haven't pronounced them out loud in quite a while. So my apologies again for that. I'm doing the best I can here. Number 7, Nelson. Over the mudflats of Tasman Bay, a resident saw a very bright flash in the sky. Immediately afterwards, 3 bright green balls descended at a 45-degree angle. This was 9:45 p.m. And in parentheses it says, a flying pawn shop? ? Number 8, Nelson Coast Road. At 9:45 p.m., a Nelson resident driving towards Waka Puaka saw a big white ball with a bluish tail light up the place like day. It then burst in a shower of bright particles. Number 9, Westport. Mr. L.H. Keay, spelled K-E-A-Y, a farmer, saw a bright object in the sky. It was far brighter than the moon, and lit up the sky with a bright white light that changed to green and then to red. It apparently fell eastwards. The time was, quote, somewhere around 10 o'clock, end quote. Number 10, Blenheim. Mr. and Mrs. Bell and their daughter Linda, Margaret White, and many other people saw a great green ball of light that seemed to explode over their heads. A small, brightly colored ball broke away and whizzed off to the east. It was 9:45 p.m. Mrs. M. Christensen observed a green ball about the size of a cricket ball. It descended steadily from the sky and appeared to be very close and dull in color. Time, 10:15 p.m. There was nothing of any great significance or originality in these accounts, and they followed the pattern of many other sightings. However, from the massive detail supplied by so many different people over so wide an area, it was possible to plot the track of the object with reasonable accuracy. I started work on a Mercator's plotting chart, and after several hours of checking one report against the other and calculating possible elevations and trajectories, I felt I had refined the plot sufficiently to draw in the final track of the object or objects. The result is shown on map 2. So I'll show this map again once we're done looking at this page here. So what he does here is he plots these and shows arrows of the lines that they followed. This one, I guess, came and joined that. Not too sure. The track began about 70 nautical miles north of New Plymouth, passed just to the west of Mount Egmont, and finished at D'Urville Island. When first seen, the altitude would have been about 30,000 feet, curving down on a flight path to somewhere around 10,000 feet when it disappeared. Sometime after those sightings on March 26, 1965, I had another look at the plot I had made. I could find no flaws in my thinking, but I needed more information. As I was to discover many times later, the clues were quite obvious, but I was then not sufficiently expert in realizing their significance. In point of fact, this first track line was to be the starting point of a whole string of discoveries of which I have yet to find an end. I pored over that plot for a long time before it suddenly occurred to me that the track appeared in line with the position where I had sighted the unidentified submarine object, or USO, on March 12th, 1965. So his sighting was 2 weeks prior to those other sightings that were listed here. On extending the line back, I found it was in line with the sightings of March 26th. I was positive there had to be a connection, but to prove it was a different matter. I checked my report files again and found that on March 2nd, some fishermen just north of the coast at New Plymouth had seen a large object plunge into the sea and disappear. They thought it was an aircraft and reported the incident to the appropriate authorities, but no aircraft or personnel were missing. I checked this position on the map and found that it also fitted the established track line. Was this connected with the USO of March 12th, and could the two sightings be of the same object sighted twice in 10 days? Could it be working slowly up this track, carrying out some project on the seabed? I tucked this thought away for future reference and carried on with the search. It was some days later that I remembered the UFO I had seen in 1956. So 9 years prior to that. This object was similar, and most significant of all, both objects had apparently traveled at 90 degrees to each other and finished in the same grand, all-illuminating flash in the area of D'Urville Island. If these objects were not controlled, how could anyone explain such coincidences? No two meteors or other natural phenomena could coincidentally carry out similar maneuvers, travel at 90 degrees to each other, and both decide to end their existence at the same point in space within 9 years of each other. Also, in both cases, objects had been seen to emerge from the parent bodies. This was irrefutable evidence that they were intelligently controlled vehicles. I plotted the track of the 1956 UFO on the map at 90 degrees to the north-south line. Let's check that real quick. Okay. I realized that I had no definite proof that they were at exactly 90 degrees to each other, or that the 1956 track was not a few miles north or south of this position. Still, I had to start from somewhere, and I would assume this to be correct unless and until other evidence proved me wrong. Two track lines at 90 degrees meant little on their own. If I found several at 90 degrees, I might have something. A grid, perhaps? These two lines hinted at this, and I believed that if I could solve the system of measurement, then I had two ready-made baselines to work from. Once again, I went to the UFO files and found that a Frenchman by the name of Aimé Michael had been studying UFOs for a number of years and had found small sections of track lines in various areas of Europe. Saucers had been seen hovering at various points along these track lines, and Mr. Michael had observed that the average distance between these points was 54.43 kilometers. By itself, this was only a small grain of information, but like a starting gun, it set me off again. Using the Kaipara Harbor as a starting point, I marked off the 54.43 kilometer intervals along the track line I had found. I was disappointed when I was unsuccessful in obtaining even distribution of position. I'll reread that. I was disappointed when I was unsuccessful in obtaining an even distribution of positions to the D'Urville Island disappearing point. I checked and rechecked, but nothing worked out. I slept on the problem, and at some time during the night, inspiration turned up the wick. Once more, the light grew bright. I remembered that a great number of sightings had occurred around the Blenheim area. Even before the advent of ordinary aircraft in New Zealand, this area had been visited by UFOs. I had read about them in old copies of the local papers, and many recent sightings suggested again that this area had something special about it. So I dragged out my map and extended the track line until it cut a 90-degree coordinate from the town of Blenheim. The distance from this point to the Kaipara position found to be exactly 300 nautical miles. So far, so good. I stepped off the 54.43 kilometer intervals and swore. Still, the thing didn't fit. Frustration was always my companion in this business, and we had many, many arguments. Sometimes it was a protracted battle of wits, a fiddle with my computer, and I was off again. The distance of 54.43 kilometers found by Michael. His last name's spelled Michel, so it could be Michelle, but I'm saying Michael here for time being. The distance was only an average estimate. I found that 55.5955 kilometers was equal to 30 nautical miles, and this divides exactly into 300 nautical miles. Yeah, I found that 55.5955 kilometers was equal to 30 nautical miles, and this divides exactly into 300, 10 times. Was this the system of measurement used by the UFOs? There was no proof, of course, but it seemed a reasonable assumption. A minute of arc is a measurement which could apply to the whole universe. It just so happens that a minute of arc from the Earth's center subtends at the surface what we call a nautical mile. So be it. Since I made that statement in my first book, I have been attacked repeatedly by university personnel and others in the academic field. They have maintained that degrees and minutes of arc are arbitrary values set up by the ancient mathematicians and that therefore my calculations are meaningless. I believe the evidence shown in this book will now convince them that my original assumptions were correct. The angular values of 360 degrees and 21,600 minutes of arc, which constitute a complete circle, have direct geometric associations with the speed of light. The fifth interval of 30 nautical miles from the Kaipara position coincided with the position off the coast of New Plymouth where the mysterious object had plunged into the sea. The plotted points of disappearance of the two large UFOs at D'Urville Island did not quite match up with the ninth interval, but this did not worry me unduly, as I expected that a small percentage of error must be expected in my original plot. I readjusted this position to the ninth interval and carried on the search to see how many other sightings I could fit into this pattern. The results exceeded my expectations. I found that by using units of 30 minutes of arc latitude north-south and 30 minutes of arc longitude east-west, on my Mercator's map, a grid pattern formed into which a great number of UFO reports could be fitted. I eventually had a map with 16 stationary and 17 moving UFOs plotted on a grid of intersections and track lines. And this next page, it has a map. It says original grid map produced in 1965. The map shows a section of grid A over New Zealand area. Small circles are positions of verified UFO activity. So I'll blow this one up for you guys to see here. And we'll pause that slideshow for now. Okay. So we have this grid map, and there are, you can see there's little circle plot points here. My apologies on it not being clear. It's just the way this camera's working. There we go. So all the circles here are the plotted sightings. And this is New Zealand. And that's Christchurch there. Just for reference. Okay. Having satisfied myself that my reasoning and plotting were not false, I considered that I had good proof that New Zealand, possibly other countries, and probably the whole world were being systematically covered by some type of grid system. See Grid Map 3. Yeah, again, he's saying that this is starting to uncover something much larger that he's falling into now here with his research. Just give me a second here. All right. I subsequently discovered that the grid lattice could be further divided. It is now evident that the grid lines in the main system are spaced at intervals of 7.5 minutes of arc north-south and east-west. The importance of this will prove itself when compared to the rest of the calculation in this book. There are 21,600 minutes of arc in a circle, and when this is divided by 7.5, we get a value of 2,880. The grid lattice, therefore, is tuned harmonically to twice the speed of light, 288, as will be shown in other sections. It appeared that I had found a section of a geometric grid pattern in the New Zealand area. I now had to form some theory of construction for the whole world. I could then possibly fit the New Zealand section into it. By drawing a series of patterns on a small plastic ball, I finally found a system which could be used as a starting point for global investigation. The basic pattern is shown in diagram 2. And diagram 2 is directly on the next page here. Now he's saying these mathematics are being put together based off of a globe model. So I'm sure there's other mathematics that will help it adjust for different types of maps, not just the Mercator map here. I was sure I was on the right track, but I now had to superimpose this pattern on the world globe. It was essential that I find a point position somewhere on the Earth upon which to orientate the geometrical pattern. I finally came upon an item of news that gave me a very important clue on how to proceed. On August 29th, 1964, the American survey ship Eltanin, E-L-T-A-N-I-N, was carrying out a sweep of the seabed off the coast of South America. A series of submarine photographs was being taken of the area by means of a camera attached to a long cable. A surprise was in store when these photographs were developed. On one of the points in marvelous detail was an aerial-type object sticking up from an otherwise featureless seabed. The object appeared to be metallic and perfectly symmetrical in construction. The array consisted of 6 main crossbars with small knob-like ends and a small crossbar at the top. So let's try to imagine that again. Perfectly symmetrical, 6 main crossbars with small knob-like ends and a small crossbar at the top. Each cross looked to be set at angles of 15 degrees to the others, and the whole system stood about 2 feet in height. The position where this object was found was given as latitude 59 degrees 8 feet south, longitude 105 degrees west. And again, these measurements I'm really unsure of how to pronounce here. As this bit of ironmongery was situated at a depth of 13,500 feet below the surface, I was certain that no human engineers had placed it there. And then we have a photograph here. It says aerial type object photographed by the survey ship Leedskalnin. So here's this with the rods, with the nodules. And this looks like an overhead, but partially, I don't know, it's like on an angle. It's an overhead, but it's on an angle. I wish it were a bit clearer. Oh yeah, that's that. So then we have this diagram also. It's just saying, it's showing the relationship of grid structure to the geographic poles. Each of the 2 grids has a similar pattern, the interaction of which sets up a third resultant grid. The poles of the 3 grids are positioned at 3 different latitudes and longitudes. So again, we have specific points here on this grid where there's a lot of crossover. And there's 4 points that make a square, and then there's yet another central point here. And I'd like to see this all like laid out flat, because we're only seeing one side of this grid here. Scientists may be able to descend to those depths in specially constructed bathyspheres, but I don't think they could work as deeply as that on a precision engineering problem. Yeah, imagine having to go down almost 14,000 feet just to do some construction work. It's not going to happen. In view of my earlier sightings in the Kaipara Harbor, I was willing to accept that the aerial type object had been placed there by an unidentified submarine object, or USO. Since this photo was taken, there has been a determined attempt by the scientific world to label this object as nothing more than a plant of some sort. A journalist friend and I managed to visit the Leedskalnin during one of its few visits to New Zealand, and when we discussed this object with some of the scientists on board, the comment was that it was classed as an artifact. This was before the great hush-up, but regardless of that, I believe that the mathematical proofs will show without a doubt that the object is artificial and most probably an aerial of some sort. The form of this aerial-like structure also fitted in with the general pattern of the grid as I had envisaged it on the plastic ball. The 6 main crossbars denoted the radiating points of 6 or 12 great circles which form the main structure of the grid. So let's take a look at that one more time. We're looking at this object here in the photo. And you can see the nodules on the rods and all that. I centered the grid on the position of the object found by the Altanin, and the 180-degree reciprocal of this is in Russian Siberia. So that on the opposite end of the map. Lining the whole thing up with the section I had found in New Zealand. I found the system to be lined up very closely with the magnetic field of the Earth. The equator of the grid followed very closely the line of zero dip around the world. That is, the positions of the Earth's surface where a magnetic compass needle has only a horizontal and no vertical component. In my earlier works, I discussed the methods I used to line up the system and calculate the first estimates of the grid pole positions and the major focal points of the grid, similar to the Altanin, quote, aerial, end quote, placement. The reciprocal position of the Altanin aerial is at altitude 59 degrees 08 north, or 8 feet north. I'm just going to say 8 feet. Longitude 75 degrees east in Siberia. I calculated the length of the diagonal of what I call, for simplicity, the, quote, polar grid square, end quote, and found it to be 5,091.168825 minutes along the arc, or of the arc long. I plotted a track from the Siberian position through the north geographic pole and measured off this distance to locate another corner aerial of the polar square. Square is not technically the right word to use, as the four sides are formed by sections of small circles, which are in different planes to each other. When the polar square areas are transferred from the surface of the Earth sphere onto a flat plane, such as a map, then a perfect square is formed with sides 3,600 minutes long and diagonals of 5,091.168825 minutes of arc. In my first two books, I stated in error that the sides of the polar squares were formed by sections of great circles 3,600 minutes of arc long instead of small circles. The great circle distance between these points is in fact 3,418.5 minutes of arc, which is very confusing to any investigator attempting to reconstruct the grid. I apologize to my readers for this error, which was caused by my lack of access to calculators during my earlier research. In the grid pattern, there are actually two small circle segments and one great circle segment connecting each of these points, which form the polar squares. Each of the segments has a different path over the Earth, and some tricky calculating is necessary to ascertain the true length. Although I used the wrong term in my earlier publications, the actual calculations derived from the grid system are not altered in any way, and still stand the test of time. Over the last few years, I have slightly refined the values I demonstrated previously, derived from a mixture of practical and theoretical studies. I have now set up what I see as a completely theoretical system discovered by working entirely by calculator. Time will prove how close my calculations are. I have no doubt that I and others will continue further to perfect the system as more facts come to light. Once I had established this first baseline, I found it quite easy to construct the main skeleton of the grid over the whole surface of the Earth. As my work progressed, I found that there were in fact two similar grids interlocked with each other. The poles of the grids were spaced at different distances from the north geometric pole, and this arrangement set up a series of geometric harmonics which were directly related to the speed of light, mass, and gravity. The interaction of the two grids created a harmonic resonance, which in turn formed a third resultant grid. The theoretical position for the three grid poles in the northern hemisphere are as follows. It lists grid pole A, grid pole B, grid pole C. Grid pole A, latitude 72.4266 degrees, longitude 90 degrees west, 1054.4 minutes of arc from the North Pole. Grid B, latitude is 78.4266, longitude 105 degrees west, 694.4 minutes of arc from the North Pole. And the resultant grid is pole C, latitude 75.6 degrees, longitude 97.5 degrees west, 864 minutes of arc from the North Pole. Reciprocal positions will give similar values for the northern hemisphere. And then we have one more diagram here for this chapter. It says, showing the relationship of grid polar squares A, B, and C. The polar squares are oriented in reciprocal positions around both the north and south geographic poles. And it's explaining again the grid pole A, B, and C, their minutes of arc from the geographic poles. And then, of course, there's D, North Geographic Pole, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, and Q, R, and S. I'll blow this up since we're at the end here for today. All right. So this is another grid pattern. And again, he was saying that these are all at different heights, so they don't all crisscross on each other. They're either above or below each other. So he's finding patterns that are emerging here. So that is the end of chapter 2. And just so that we're making a good pace here. Next week we will start chapter 3, which is titled The Unified Equations. And that's going to get into the space race, which I have my own opinions on that. But it should be pretty good. I think it'll be a good chapter. And really, we could read chapters 3 and 4 for next week if we really push it here, yeah. Because chapter 4 is only 6 pages. So I think we can combine chapters 2 and 3 for next time. And that way we're not doing this up until midsummer. So then we can get through this a little quicker. But as you can see, it's taken a lot of time. Hey, Woo, good to see you. Yeah, so that'll be it for today. And we'll be here next week, Tuesday, with part 14. And just a heads up to everybody for the rest of the channel. Thursday, we have our continuation of the deep dive series into the Bermuda Triangle. We are very close to starting the Great Lakes Triangle series, which will be on Fridays. So if it's not going to be this Friday, it will definitely be next Friday. But I've been doing a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff with getting that prepped to be its own show. And it's also a companion show to the Bermuda Triangle series, so I instead of combining it with the Bermuda Triangle, it's its own thing. The Great Lakes Triangle, I think we'll find even more subjects to get into just on the Great Lakes, because I do have a lot of naval books that I picked up from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, that was about the Great Lakes. So I think that's going to really play into the Great Lakes Triangle series. I'd rather read those books on that series than the Bermuda Triangle, because the that's all the way in Florida. That's not over here near Chicago in the Great Lakes. And then on Saturdays, we have the Chicago Film Industry series of the 1900s. And we are pretty far along in that. I believe we're starting part 8 for this Saturday. But we're very close to the end of that book that we're reading there, Flickering Empire. There's also more film history that I want to get into. And I'll see how that develops as we go on. I might replace the Chicago Film Industry show with a different film industry show, but whenever I feel we could add on to these deep dives, I'll do so. And like I said, some of these deep dives eventually will not be weekly anymore, as I cover most of what I can. But there's so much content we can get into at Coral Castle here. I can keep this going for quite a while, because this is all source material for books that were written about Coral Castle. So people are using this as material to come to a conclusion as to how Ed built his castle, which we still don't know for 100% how he did it. So that's what we're doing here with this show, is trying to figure out how he did it, or come to our best conclusions with it. And there's a lot of material we can cover to help us get closer to that. And other than that, Sunday will be another Let's Talk live stream. So we'll just be chilling, talking about stuff going on. And I do plan on showing some of the new Deep Dive series intros that I've been working on, because I have 3 of them. 3 additional ones besides the 3 that are already going right now. And so that'll bring us to a total of 6 different shows per week. And if you include the Let's Talk, that's a show every day. And I'll be able to do that for a solid 2 months every day. It's just it's gonna take time, but I'm gonna do it, because I want to get this information out, and I think all you deserve that. So that'll be it for today. I really hope to see you guys next week. And for those of you watching after the fact, I really appreciate it. Please hit the like and share, subscribe, and I hope you all have a good rest of your week. Until the next one, class dismissed.